Joining us on the program now from Visionwest, Brook Turner. Brook, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
The budget announcement, I suppose, a clear indicator of the government's priorities and where it is heading. Now, you don't get a vote or a veto on this one, but let's be optimistic for a moment. What sort of things do you feel that the budget should focus on? What would be really helpful for the people that you're helping in your community?
Sure. Well, I mean, your audience will be no stranger to the housing issue, and I know that maybe it's getting a little bit tiresome for people to hear about the housing crisis, but we've all got friends in whānau who have either left the country or are struggling to actually have adequate housing. The government has signalled investment in more housing right across the continuum. And as a community housing provider, we're very hopeful for funding to be able to build more houses. The hope for a place like Visionwest, much like our faith-led colleagues, is to build intergenerational supportive housing for future generations of Kiwis that struggle. And we're very optimistic that there will be announcements about that. From a more somber position, very concerned to see the rise of homelessness, particularly in Auckland, but right across the motu. There's a rise of homelessness in all our major cities and some of our more rural locations. Some of the listeners will be aware, maybe you're noticing street homelessness a bit more. Someone parked up on your street or in your neighbourhood, at your local park, a streetie outside a supermarket or a community hub. And since the real shutdown of emergency housing, which was becoming squalor and was unsafe for people to live in, and we acknowledge that, we haven't seen the reinvestment into homelessness services.
So and certainly as we're heading into the colder months of the year, and perhaps the first time we've hit winter with that emergency housing, after that emergency housing shutdown, this is going to be a tough winter for many people in our communities.
It is going to be tough. And, you know, what ends up happening is that those who are struggling have to make some terrible choices about what they're going to do. You know, do I pay my rent this week, or do the kids get the food they need? Do we keep the power on, or do we put petrol in the car? You know, do we, buy those school shoes, or does the boy have to go to school barefoot because actually I've got to pay this utility bill? Those are the fundamental squeezes that are on. And look, we're all feeling the squeeze, aren't we? Every single cost index is going up for all of us. But those who are on the margins feel that so much more in a more pronounced way. And we've seen that in food insecurity rising from 21% to 27% of the population in the last 12 months. So we'd love to see some investment in food support for marginalised communities, especially as we're approaching winter. But in general, because we don't want children's bellies to go empty.
Certainly, and again, there's been some talk about supermarket regulation, and inflation seems to be more under control than it used to be. What we haven't seen is a drop of prices for basics at our supermarket in the last wee while, and as you say, that's a very difficult situation. Just circling back to housing, actually, it was recent. This is something we were talking about earlier in the week, actually. The results of the Australian election seemed to indicate that housing was a key issue for Australians, and probably one of the key factors that, Anthony Albanese's government got elected back in with an increased majority is because that was a government prepared to say, we're going to put in a program which allows people to get into their own homes. That was a game changer for politics in Australia. Perhaps a lesson we could learn here?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, most New Zealanders, look, we all have our political leanings, right? And we don't need to get into that here today. But what we can say is what we all want for our friends and family, our parents, our children, you know, our friends in the neighbourhood. And I think fundamentally to that, you know, we want a good education system. We want adequate housing, opportunity for all to get in and live in their own home. You know, we want accessible and free healthcare that we can all get, and community healthcare where we don't have to go to the hospital, you know, that it can be in our own communities. And I think for those things, as a nation, we really need to stand up and say, just like our roads and infrastructure, we need longer term planning than just 3 years.
Yeah.
We need to agree that we need to build a New Zealand with adequate infrastructure, with adequate health, education, housing, and support for all of us. And when we've got that, the economy does better, our children do better, our communities do better, and we all thrive. Now, what does that take? Well, it takes a willingness of us to stare in the face of perhaps, those numbers, the money coming into the country and what we've actually got to spend, because the government's just like you and I, they've got limited resources. But let's take a long-term view and let's be courageous and let's build, like some of our forefathers and foremothers did, for a nation where all New Zealanders can thrive. And right now, we're just on that slippery slope, and I'd love to see that longer investment. There are some signals in that, particularly in the infrastructure spend, which will be interesting to take note of.
There are, as you say, this is a budget, and for anybody that is trying to manage a household budget at the moment, you can't have everything that you want in that regard. Probably the big political story of the week has been pay equity. Just briefly, your thoughts on this, because I'm sure that it affects many people in the charitable sector as well, and not enough money to pay the bills. I mean, that's the beginning of a slide towards poverty.
Absolutely. And look, there is close to 1,400 Visionwest staff that in some way have been implicated in one of those 30 or one or more of those 33 claims that you've been hearing about in the news.
Yeah.
And when you think about it in our sector, I can only speak to our sector, in this human care sector, we're talking about people looking after the elderly in their homes, making sure they've got a shower, helping them to toilet, to medicate, people in injury recovery, people with disabilities that want to live independently in their homes. And their wages now, and it's largely a female workforce, are below the minimum wage, below the living wage, below the living wage. And the last time there was a wage increase for many of our home and support workers in New Zealand was 2018.
Wow.
Think about all the inflation and the rise of costs to live since then. So, I don't know what happens to our community health and our social services if we don't pay people enough and a fair wage to look after those who are the most vulnerable. And statistically, those workforces are majority female.
Yeah.
We just know that maternal instinct to care, it's more common amongst females in the workforce. So look, we are really saddened by what has happened, because we've fought for a very long time as an organisation for our workforce. We are hopeful that there'll be an announcement soon of how these claims could be brought to fruition faster.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a sucker punch. And look, personally for me, Andrew, when your two daughters are, going at you over the breakfast table and saying, oh my goodness, how could this happen? We were a world leader. We've got Kate Shepherd on the $10 bill.
Yeah.
There's people around the world looking at New Zealand's pay equity claim as an example, and in 2 days it's been wiped.
Yeah.
I think there's widespread concern of what this means.
Now, just a little bit of a question on this one, and I don't mean this as a pushback, but people may be asking this. Look, as a charity, Visionwest needs to pay its bills, but could you not, as an organisation, make some decisions on how you look after your own staff? I mean, sure, not across the entire sector, but as for you and your team, I suppose, some tough decisions there. But again, of course, the more you spend on wages, the less is available for the practical needs of the people you're supporting. Some tough decisions, not just at a government level, but budgeting for agencies such as yourselves.
Yeah, and look, it's a really good question, and Visionwest does everything we can in that area. The truth is that for most of our workforce, we're actually delivering on government programs that are funded by government. So it's a throughput amount of money that goes from government through Visionwest to the workforce at a set rate. And so if we get out of step with that rate effectively, you can see that is, Visionwest subsidising a government contract for services, which is unsustainable. So ourselves and others in the sector, we work in good faith with government for a workforce that we are in partnership to support to help New Zealanders to make the biggest difference. And that is rightly so. Should parents pay more for their children to go to school so that we can pay teachers more? I think most parents would say, no, it's the government's responsibility to pay teachers an adequate wage so that my children get a good education. It's no different for us.
Yeah, no, and hey, thank you for clarifying that and putting that in context. Now, lots of hopes and aspirations for the budget announcements next Thursday, or even Finance Minister's announcements this morning. How optimistic are you, Brook, that we'll get some of the announcements that you're hoping and praying for?
Look, I am hopeful and I have faith, and I believe that, most people anywhere who are in positions of leadership want to do good. And I talk to people who are decision makers in government all the time. And I'm very optimistic that there are going to be some strong announcements in terms of how we help those socially and economically, and those who need more health support and more educational support. But I do think that it's a squeeze this time round. And, I am concerned by some of the signals that there are. But, in times like this, groups like us just have to stand. We have to stand with our communities. We have to continue to do the work we have done for the last 35 years, and that is still desperately needed today. And we have to continue to have the conversations about where the gaps are and where improvements can be made. I'm sure there will be some thumbs up to some of the decisions that come forward in the next couple of weeks, and there'll be some question marks too. But that's the same with any budget. It's not unique to this one.
Well, we very much value and appreciate the work that you do and the example that you bring. Visionwest.org.nz for more information about that work. Brook, kia ora, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.